Welcome to the Fear and Greed Business Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. We talk a lot about artificial intelligence, about how businesses can use AI to improve productivity and the challenges in navigating a period of significant disruption. But in terms of the opportunity for Australia, we're only just scratching the surface. Now, one of this country's most respected tech leaders has used a National Press Club address to lay out exactly how big the potential is and what the government needs to do to get us there. Scott Farquhar is the co-founder of Atlassian and the chair of the Tech Council of Australia. Scott, welcome to Fear and Greed.
I'm so glad to be here.
How big is the prize, the AI prize?
Look, I want to take you back a little bit in terms of history. And when you look at humans as builders of tools, all the advances have come when you can really work out new ways to use energy to advance human civilization. So we used wind and water to mill grain. We used coal to power steam and eventually steel. We used oil to power our cars and our planes. And at each of those junctures, when we used energy for a more advanced usage, it really propelled everything we could do as a species. And we are now at a moment in time when we can now use energy to do knowledge work. And so whilst we've got used to using energy to replace us plowing in a field, we will eventually get used to knowledge, kind of using energy to replace a call center worker, answering the same call or the same request day in, day out. And so in these moments of time, you have an opportunity to change the global pecking order. And when also, small advantages early on can compound into big advantages over time. And so let's take two examples. One is Industrial Revolution. So the UK had accessible coal deposits that, of course, they can use to build, railways and steel. And then the railways made the next coal deposits even cheaper, which then was a virtuous cycle. And of course, that eventually led to the building of their navies, with steam and steel, which led to an empire, for 150 years. And while that seems a long time ago, if we take the example of Singapore went from, what would be argued a sort of colonial, swampland, a century or so ago to a country that's now a sort of a world power. And if you look at that, in my lifetime, 45 years, Singapore has taken advantage of container ships. And, container ships were a new technology, and Singapore bet behind them, betting on ports and making sure they had a stable rule of law and, an advantageous business environment. And as a result, are now the second largest port in the world. And again, that was from a small advantage that has compounded over the last 50 years. And over that same time period, they've gone from 40%, give or take, of the US's GDP per capita to 125% of the US's GDP per capita. And so in just, I think 45 years is my lifetime, not a long time. Yeah. They've kind of lapped the US in productivity. And so I think about all that and think the AI opportunity is a huge chance for Australia to, rewrite the scoreboard in terms of global trade, and that's the opportunity ahead of us.
So what's the Australian equivalent to ports or to coal?
So Singapore had some natural advantages, obviously a port, but they were one of 5 ports in that particular region of the world that could have become large. They had a stable rule of law. They progressively attracted businesses. And if we look at our advantages in Australia, let's just take the data center opportunity for us, the ability to build data centers to host computers for the region and for the world. A couple on. First, we're in a great region, which is the Asia Pacific region and Southeast Asia region, which is actually reasonably large and growing when it comes to computer usage. And so a statistic there is that there are more users of ChatGPT between Indonesia and Vietnam than there are in the US. So we're close to that. We have abundant talent in terms of our raw talent. We have access to green and renewable energy. We have abundant raw materials. If we want to build concrete and steel to house these data centers, we've got a stable rule of law, which is important when people are looking to put these huge capital investments. And lastly, in this time of geopolitical uncertainty, we have access to chips, high-speed chips that many other countries don't have access to. And so all of that are our raw natural advantages. And what we need to do is press this early advantage by really aggressively investing to sort of build those compound benefits over time.
Ben, at the press club yesterday, you were talking about the government needing to pave the way. Previously, maybe 20 years ago, you were talking about the government getting out of the way. What does the government need to do now to enable private sector, public markets to take advantage of what you're talking about?
There are two areas I look at that the government could really have a big impact. One is the data center opportunity, and that is private capital largely, so we don't need the government to provide capital here. What we do need is for them to change copyright laws. In 2014, the Law Reform Commission recommended changes to Australian copyright laws. In 2016, the Productivity Commission. And the reason for that is that our copyright laws are out of step with the rest of the world. And so that's halting and preventing a lot of large players from putting their models here in Australia.
Just dig into that a little bit. So is this because large language models can't access the information? I'm not quite sure where you're going on the copyright.
Yeah, let me go through that. In copyright law, it can be quite niche and esoteric, and so that's a very valid question. And to be honest, I'm not the best expert at this myself, but the thing is that most nations have, both Europe and the US, have what's called a fair use exemption. And so if I copy a whole book, that's a problem.
Yep.
If I use part of it for a Google search result, or I train part of it on a large language model, and that's a new and novel and a different use, that's called fair use. In Australia, our fair use exception is very limited. And so what we find is overseas companies, large language models, but even Australian companies training their own models on, maybe images or image recognition or image generation, those things are a problem for us. And so we need to make that. That seems like a straightforward, and there's no more reports needed. Like the government just needs to amend those. So that's one thing on the data center. Two is there's so many more jobs available in this opportunity, and we really call on the unions to go from having 4-year apprenticeships to having something where there's a stepping stone. Because if someone was a call center worker and they want to retrain to build data centers, I don't think we can go through a 4-year apprenticeship in order to make that happen. And so, the unions can work with that. We should create tech trades. We should create digital apprenticeships, and they should get people into the workforce in 6 or 12 months, building data centers or connecting batteries, to the grid. The last one, and I think this is a very bold idea here, is to create the concept of a digital embassy. So we have embassies in Australia where, they are subject to the laws of the country, not Australia, but they're, subject to the laws of the overseas country. So Japan has an embassy in Australia. It's, Japan laws. And if we did that and said, hey, you can put a data center on Australian soil and, it's going to have Australian jobs, Australian steel, Australian fiber optic cable, Australian power, but the computers in that data center are subject to the laws of the country, say Japan, that would make us much more attractive to other countries to host their data centers here in Australia.
Stay with me, Scott. We'll be back in a minute. My guest this morning is Scott Farquhar, co-founder of Atlassian and the chair of the Tech Council of Australia. The digital embassies at the moment, am I right in saying what you're saying is the difference is a data center allowing Japan's laws to rule that data center. At the moment, that's not the case. Is that right? Because if I have information in the US, it's US law that follows. Is that right?
So it's fascinating here, actually, and probably not something obvious to many of your listeners or many Australians, is that the way international law has evolved around the digital age is it's all about where the data center exists. And so you might have an Australian accessing a data center in Singapore that is operated by a US company. And in some cases, that is governed by Australian law. In some cases, that's governed by Singaporean law. And in some cases, it's governed by the US law. And if you're a company saying, where can I put my data center? It's nice to not have to think, well, what are the laws of Australia? What may they change in the future? And how do I have to think about that? And one of the reasons a lot of data centers are in Singapore is because it's pro-business environment. And I think we could leapfrog that by literally making it subject to the laws of the country that wants to host their data in Australia.
At the press club yesterday, you talked about sand in the wheels. I think I'm not quite sure what the phrase you used, but it's basically about government ensuring that they they keep up with what the private sector's doing, particularly around AI. Just explain that.
When these transformations happen, when we can use energy in new and wonderful ways, we make something that was hard now becomes easy. Let's take the Industrial Revolution. It used to take up 80 days to cross the Atlantic in both directions, a round trip. It then took about 8 days. But what we found is the ports became the bottleneck then, right? Because we didn't make ports more efficient, and it actually took 150 to 200 years to come up with the concept of container ships, to improve ports. And if we look at AI and how it can make business more productive, the interactions with government are going to become even more of a bottleneck. And one example I give, because I think it's relevant to everyone in Australia, is housing. At the moment, housing, according to most of the Productivity Commission reports and others, is bottlenecked behind approvals. And at the moment, the way you do approvals is you often do a multi-100-page document, you print it out, you take it to council, and it sits on a desk for a few weeks, and eventually, maybe reviewed, and then you find out yes or no. And in that time, you don't know whether it's going to be approved or not. You don't know what significant changes you might have. The cost of your raw materials is going up every day. You sit there and wait for a reply. But if you think about what's possible with AI, that same government department could have trained a digital agent on every DA that's ever been submitted, every DA that's approved, every DA that was rejected. And that AI could work with the council officer and means that every DA gets approved within a week. And we can take that even further. What about if that AI was available to the public, and whilst it couldn't approve your DA for you, we could say, well, you have a 40% chance of approval or a 60% chance of approval, or, hey, here's feedback to make your application better. If we did that, imagine if you're sitting with your architect or your builder and you want to know whether you can do something, you would then submit it multiple times to continue to get it better. And then you could take that even one step further. At the moment, if you're a developer and you want to, build a block of apartments, you've got to buy that land. You then have to, spend, in their case, it's months or even years to build that application. And then so huge sunk costs, huge capital costs. And then if it, often those things turn on whether you can have 6 or 8 apartments is the difference between whether that makes sense or not. So imagine that developer who could then interact with that, agent, with that AI, and know whether they could build those apartments before they purchase that block. That would make it a huge difference to the nation in terms of how fast we could build. And this is not changing any planning laws. This is not saying we should do anything outside of the planning laws. This is just removing the friction, like that, what I call sand in the gears of commerce that the government provides. And again, when we can start, maybe when it took a year to work out your plans for a house, the 6 weeks were not a problem. But as AI increasingly makes it easier to design houses and faster to build houses with 3D printing or other technologies we do, that government approval process is going to become even more stark. And that can be applied across the entire government. Imagine we want the best and the brightest to come to Australia. At the moment, someone can be sitting in Europe after work one day, surfing seek.com.au and finding if they want a job. They find the job of their dreams. We think, Australia would love to have them. And then they work out, okay, well, there's a multi-month process to work out whether I can get a visa approved here. Imagine again, if they could do that on an app in an hour and find out whether they could get a visa approved. And I'm not saying we should have more people come to Australia, but imagine the bar, how high the bar could be if we had many more people applying for these amazing jobs here. And so apply every level of government from, local government all the way through to federal government can benefit by using digital agents to speed approvals.
Are you optimistic about Australia's AI future, Scott?
I totally am optimistic, both at that level of nation building where the data centers can really make a difference for us. We just have so many natural advantages that if we parlay them now, we can grow them into long-term enduring advantages. But also the opportunity, for businesses to take up this new technology. And if government, we have a government with a strong majority now, so they can't point to anyone else holding them back. It's up to them to set the tone and tenor of where we want to be as a nation. And I think we have the opportunity to skate to where the puck is going as a nation. And my experience as a technologist is if you live in the future, you start creating it. And if as a country we can start living in that future, we can start creating it.
Fantastic advice. Tell me, do you miss running Atlassian day to day? You haven't been there for a year or so, a bit longer probably. Do you miss it?
Look, I miss hanging out with the people. I miss out with the management team. I miss, sparring on ideas with Mike. But I have had opportunities now to spend time with my kids, to travel a bit, and to work on the tech industry and help out with the Tech Council, and that's been super rewarding.
Fantastic, Scott. Thank you for talking to Fear and Greed.
Great, thanks, Sean.
That was Scott Farquhar, co-founder of Atlassian and the chair of the Tech Council of Australia. This is the Fear and Greed Business Interview. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed Business News You Can Use. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.